Are you resistant to this hormone? Welcome to Be Fab, Be You Made Simple, your daily dose of inspiration designed to help you reinvent yourself by optimizing your body and mind. I am Maria Horstman, a health editor and coach, a fitness trainer, a speaker, and an entrepreneur, founder of BeFabBeYou.com. Our episodes are short and will bring you valuable content and practical nuggets for optimal health and fitness that you can implement ASAP. Let's get you to feel fabulous every day. Are you ready? Check out the show notes to 1, schedule a free call with me to discuss a plan to take your health to the next level. 2, submit a question to be featured in our Ask Me Anything episodes on Sundays. Connect with me on social media and much more. Hit the subscribe button, and if you like what you hear, share with your friends and leave it a rating. Are you resistant to this hormone? Welcome back to another episode of the Be Fab, Be You Made Simple podcast. This is Maria Horstman, founder of BeFabBeYou.com, and I'm your host today and every other episode too. Anyway, this is a place we have raw, honest conversations, and they're targeted to educate you and inspire you to be proud of your choices when it comes to your health and fitness. So you feel great in your own skin. Isn't that amazing? I bet you want that as much as I want, and most people out there too. If you are looking to transform your health and fitness and quality of life, I will help you to identify the healing opportunities, establish a plan, and execute a plan together. So if that's of interest to you, go back to BeFabBeYou.com, book a complimentary call, and let's rock and roll. So the theme of August for this podcast is about metabolic health. In the first episode, number 54, I introduced you to key biomarkers of metabolic health. In today's episode, we're going to talk about metabolic health and weight loss and metabolism, and weight loss, also fat loss kind of thing, because in the end of the day, most people are interested on fat loss, not so much on the weight loss. I also will introduce you to key players into the metabolic health, which are blood glucose, insulin, and insulin resistance. Okay, if you think that you know it all about this stuff, well, I encourage you to stay tuned over here and listen to my perspective, which might open your mind to different point of views or different angles to look into it, okay? So for me, it is important that you understand these guys or gals, whatever you want to call it, before we dive into deeper culprits of poor metabolic health, measured here through the metabolic biomarkers I discussed in episode 54. So go back to that episode in case you need a refresher, or if this is the first time you are coming to my podcast here. So also complementary to today's episode, you might want to check out episode 12. And there I share and discuss blood sugar and hormone optimization meal cycle and the beautiful graph that I created. And I also talk about health, heart health in there. So remember that I add the links to references to the transcript of episodes, which you can find at BeFabBeYou.com/podcast. All these links are also in the show notes, okay? Sounds good? So let's rock and roll. So why do we need to keep talking about glucose, insulin, and insulin resistance? Well, I know I talk quite a bit about it, so let me share a few reasons I keep talking about it. First, I used to have blood sugar dysregulation, insulin resistance, and prediabetes. This topic is near and dear to my heart, and I truly believe that everyone in the world needs to be aware of these things, okay? Know exactly where you stand, what they are about, because that's the beginning of a process of, health regulation and control of your own health, ultimately. Second, Most people only associate insulin to diabetes, and that really understates its power, especially when cells become insulin resistant, which we're going to talk in a minute here. Third, insulin resistance often starts years before it progresses to type 2 diabetes. And know that a person with type 2 diabetes is insulin resistant as well. So that goes hand in hand. You can say one and you will say the other. Plus, a recent study in middle-aged and elderly Chinese found that insulin resistance is the main predeterminant of developing prediabetes. Yes. And, I didn't know what came first on me, but I had both. And I'm going to go about saying that insulin resistance was my first issue. And you kind of understand a little bit more here how this works in the body. Fourth, according to the International Diabetes Association, the number of people with insulin resistance has doubled in the last 30 years and projected to double again in the next 20 years. Meaning what? It is progressing faster, okay? Lastly, unfortunately, that, many people with insulin resistance have no idea that they are insulin resistant. Depending on how resistant the person is, he or she may not feel the side effects of insulin resistance. That's because the inflammation is going on inside. And a lot of time that does not hurt us yet, right? So I'm here from a preventive perspective. And the kind of, this inflammation that I'm talking about and this insulin resistance is not the one that we want. And because it builds up slowly and steady with the potential to develop unwanted chronic diseases. But here's the great news. Yes, I don't talk all about bad news because, everything in the end of the day here, we are empowered. We have choices. You can do 180 like I did. You have choices. You are in charge. And if you're not satisfied with the direction of your health, your fitness, and your life, you can change it with a heartbeat, okay? You can change the direction of your nutrition, movement, sleep routine, stress management, or the way that you basically manage the stress, and so many other players when it comes to our health and wellness. You can today pick one thing that will move the needle, okay, in the right direction. Yes, it is that powerful. Just decide. Maybe start with the basics here, right? Why make things a lot harder? You start making sure that you're drinking enough water. Nail that? Great. Move on to the next one. How about challenging your muscles a little bit? Nail that? Okay. Let's go to maybe other fundamental habits. Maybe it is time to get deeper, to get to some additional screenings. And I mean with that is labs, such as your cortisol, your steroid hormones, your digestion, your gut lining, food sensitivities. Know that you can evaluate and you can analyze many aspects of your life. And if you think that you got it all together, think again. I'm not quite sure. I mean, not that I don't know you, obviously, that well, but I don't think that we are always on top of everything because our bodies are evolving all the time. And it is always good to know where we are. And there is different aspects in the body and the health and the mind that we can actually always check in and assure that they are working in synchronicity. And I can help you with lab ordering, lab interpretation, and establishing a plan. And obviously, putting that plan together and celebrating those accomplishments together. So now let's talk about metabolic health and weight or fat loss. So I'm confident that you agree that most people with their waist to hip ratio, blood sugar, triglycerides, and LDL levels, and blood pressure, and even the uric acid under control, if they have those things under control, they're likely to feel better than most people out there. And I'll notice that I didn't say anything about weight. Why? Well, it's because we need to understand that carrying extra pounds don't necessarily mean you are unhealthy. Instead of using weight and the darn scale here to measure health, please take a vote with me to use the biomarkers of metabolic health, which I've just mentioned, as your starting point, as your, point that you say, what, I'm going to start seeing where I'm standing with each one of them. That is a much better way of keeping that eye into that freaking scale all the time. It'll make you crazy. So when we talk about weight or fat loss, let's invite our fellow metabolism to this health script conversation here. So metabolism refers to an awful lot of non-stop chemical processes going on inside our bodies that allow us to do what? To function, including during our sleep. Yes, there is a lot going on when we sleep, okay? So one of these processes, by the way, is the rate at which our bodies break down nutrients from our foods and use to energy, or to, for energy to build and repair the body. So our metabolism rate is influenced by multiple factors, including age, gender, physical activity, lean muscle to fat ratio, and hormone function. We have a great deal of control of 3 out of these 5 metabolic factors that I just said. In my book, that is great news, because all pillars of health that include, diet, movement, sleep, stress, toxicity, they play a role in the regulation of physical activity, lean muscle to fat ratio, and hormone function. Yes, you cannot control your gender here and your age, but you can control everything else. You have a say on everything else by applying, these pillars of health and working on each one of them. Now, would you like to know how insulin is involved in metabolism? You're like, what? Did I just heard insulin? Yes, this is, I said, is going to be about insulin and glucose and insulin resistance. So the effects of insulin on tissues are way too many to discuss today. But you must know this right now. Insulin affects the metabolism of all 3 macronutrients, which are carbohydrates, fats, or lipids, and protein. So I just mentioned over here metabolism, rate of conversion from the food, right, to energy. And now we're saying that insulin is involved in this metabolism of this food that we eat. Oh, Lord, we got to pay attention, don't you think? Since we know that the rate we burn or convert foods into nutrients is important, we better have insulin on our side and do what we can to prevent the cells from resisting insulin. Don't you agree? Yes, more about this insulin resistance in a minute here. So check out also the study titled Integration of Biochemical and Physiologic Effects of Insulin on Glucose Metabolism on PubMed for much more juicy information on this topic. So let's jump into talking about these 3 amazing things called blood glucose, blood insulin, and insulin resistance. I don't want to get too ahead of myself and make assumptions. You understand all this stuff, okay? So before we talk about how insulin impacts metabolic health biomarkers, let me set the stage about blood glucose, insulin, and insulin resistance. So let's jump into blood glucose. By definition, glucose is a simple sugar, which is important, energy source and a component of many carbohydrates. We probably all heard about that. Many carbs, such as white flour made, products, baked potatoes, instant oatmeal, juices, corn, soft drinks, dried fruits. They convert into energy quickly. These foods that convert into energy quickly are considered high glycemic foods that will result in a quick spike of insulin as well. So keep that in mind. High glycemic foods spike blood sugar as well as insulin together. Carbs aren't the villain here. Absolutely not. I'm not here to vilify this guy because it's important to us too. Can the body proceed without making carbs? Yes, that's another conversation. But it's, about the types of carbs and the choices that we make. So I want you to choose carbs rich in dietary fiber that is naturally occurring in foods instead of synthetic fiber that is added to processed foods. That means that you, in order to know this, you would have to add, to look at the labels and you see what's going on in those labels, right? Now, if you eat foods that are naturally occurring out there that don't have much of a package, well, those are natural fibers. This will keep you not only your glucose levels balanced, but also your microbiome, your digestion, your brain and body happy. You happy, everybody else happy, okay? So glucose, which is more commonly known as blood sugar, it is our body's main source of energy. So the brain alone uses about 20% of glucose in the body. Keeping glucose levels balanced throughout the day is kind of essential, don't you think? And it's essential for health, let me tell you. This is a task our healthy liver will do to keep things balanced, all right? But however, we are huge contributors to this process as well. And that comes like, it's like one of those projects in school, right? If you're like me, I care for my grades. My grades matter. And I bet you've been in teams where one person took a huge load of work because that person cared more than most in the team. Doesn't matter if the team of two or more. There are times that you see one person carry all the load, or maybe like myself, you've kind of done that too. This aggressive load of work in one person puts a lot of strain. And that person can do this for so long. Eventually, that person's performance will decrease in that one specific project or more projects that she is managing. And ultimately, everything else will suffer, not only for the grades, but from the health. You get the point. So the same thing happens here with our bodies. The quality of foods that we eat will dictate how hard the liver has to work. So other parts of the body too, right? To do what? To keep the homeostasis, to keep the body working properly. Eventually, the body gets depleted if it keeps working extra hard because of the junk that we put in. So when this depletion happens, what happens is our performance goes down. And if not taken care of, sooner or later, illnesses will rise, starting from inflammation. Because chronic inflammation, like I said, starts, getting inside our bodies. We don't feel the pain, and all of a sudden diseases happen. So let's jump into the discussion of insulin. So when we eat, the body breaks down the food and converts into glucose. Okay, great. So when we eat foods that raise glucose, the pancreas, beautiful organ here, very important organ, okay, tiny little guy, does a lot of stuff for us. It secretes this hormone called insulin. The role insulin play in the body is far beyond glucose management or regulation, which we all hear about. Insulin affects every single cell and tissue of the body. The effect really depends on the type of cell. So beautiful things called insulin receptors that land outside the surface of our cell, these receptors will bind to the insulin going on in our bloodstream. And they work like a lock and key system. So when the insulin as a lock binds to the cell in the form of a key, this bind opens a channel that allows glucose into the cell, decreasing the circulation of glucose levels in the bloodstream and ultimately doing magical things for us. For example, when insulin binds to a liver cell, the liver makes fat among many other functions, that insulin has in the liver. When insulin binds to a muscle cell, it enhances amino acid uptake and protein synthesis in the muscle tissue, among several other things. It's a beautiful thing when insulin works. The bottom line is no insulin, no life. Yes, you heard me right. So you've heard about people with type 1 diabetes. They depend on insulin. Either the pancreas isn't producing insulin at all or is producing too little for their survival. So people with this type of disease depend on insulin. And without it, a person suffers what is called diabetic ketoacidosis and can die quickly. So you probably heard that on the news too, because insulin prices continue to rise worldwide. And in the United States alone, in 2012, the cost of insulin annually per person was roughly $3,000 annually, okay? This is a huge chunk of money. Not everybody can afford this. This is a problem. So can someone with type 2 diabetes become dependent on insulin as well? Unfortunately, yes. It's not only for type 1 diabetics. When the blood sugar or the blood glucose are left high, which is also called hyperglycemia, and uncontrolled for prolonged period of times, the pancreas can stop producing insulin. And the person must then treat with insulin, and the pancreas is still producing insulin, but the cells become resistant. And that's my next topic here. So let's talk about insulin resistance. In a nutshell, insulin resistance is when the cells respond poorly to insulin. And that lock and key thing is not working. Or the cells stop responding to insulin, period. So let's assume that we have a working pancreas over here, and the pancreas is producing insulin. However, when the cells aren't responding properly, blood glucose stays high. Because what? The glucose is not entering into the cell. So that's not something that the body wants, right? We need energy. So the pancreas will keep secreting insulin because the role of insulin, right, is to assure that the glucose gets out of the bloodstream and gets into the cell. But the cycle is going to continue now because, the cells are not responding. So now we have both blood glucose and insulin high, and high levels of insulin. Hear me right here. High levels of insulin are directly related to many health conditions and metabolic health. Truly, what I want to implant into your mind, into your brain right now is the following. A person can show relatively adequate blood glucose levels and still have insulin resistance. We must pay attention to insulin levels in the body more than actually tracking our glucose, especially if that's true for someone who only goes to the doctor once in a while or maybe once a year and checks that glucose, okay? Because that once in a while single measurement is of little value, truly is of little value. Many things can impact that fasting glucose number. A stressful day, stressful night, poor sleep, you ate late, Maybe you have been fasting for prolonged periods of times, or maybe you eat all the time. Medications, exercise, muscle fatigue, insulin resistance, and the list goes on. So that little glucose number that you get measured once in a while is not really a great metric. And we're going to talk about other metrics, but insulin is one that you want to do. It is fairly easy to measure a glucose level, even from home. You buy a glucometer or you use a continuous glucose monitor, CGM. And stay tuned because I'll be sharing some fascinating data after I experienced CGM for 14 days. So more on that. So when it comes to insulin, the story is a little different. There is no home tool test yet, okay? So we need to draw the blood. And unless you've been diagnosed with diabetes, it is unlikely your doctor will run it for you. It seems like the medical community is still very focused on glucose numbers only, and that is not acceptable from my perspective. And I hope that I will be convincing you, if I have not yet, that you gotta get insulin checked. So I'm going to give you two empowering options here to how to get this done. One is definitely request your doctor to run your fasting glucose. Okay, meaning that don't eat for 12 hours or so, just water, and go get your blood checked. Okay. Or do like I do, go to a lab and do yourself. You do not need a doctor prescription for that. And recently I paid $35 to get mine done. I got it done within 15 minutes and I had the results delivered to my inbox in 2 days later. It is that simple, folks. If you're located in the United States, I'll be glad to help you order in this lab and get it interpreted as well. And I also want you to be aware that there is a difference between your results being within normal ranges and optimal ranges of about any biomarker out there, but especially, or not especially, including your glucose and your insulin. So you want to have your insulin and any other biomarkers to fall within optimal ranges. And I can help you with that as well. Now that I've covered some basics with you, next episode of the Metabolic Health Theories series, we will dive into how the dysregulation of one hormone can wreck your metabolic health, measured by its key biomarkers mentioned in episode 24 and early today. Thanks for listening and for sharing this episode and this podcast with your family and friends, and also for leaving a review on iTunes. When you do that, Apple will actually do their magic and spread the word out, and more awesome people just like you will gain access to it. So thank you in advance for doing that. And talk to you soon and make it a great one. And ciao for now. Thanks for listening to the BFAB Made Simple podcast. Can you do me a favor? If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend and leave it a rating. It helps the podcast and I really appreciate it. If you're wondering where to start, head over to my website, linked in the show notes, to sign up to receive encouragement, tips, and strategies to maximize results. While you're there, download a free health guide to get you started today. If you're looking for a coach and trainer to help you optimize your weight, body, and health, get on my calendar. Let's discuss your goals, establish a custom plan, implement it, and celebrate your results. Together, we can do this. Find the link to schedule a free energy audit strategy session also in the show notes. Connect with me on social media. I would love for you to let me know that you're listening to the show. Also, see the show notes for the links. In addition to a qualified healthcare practitioner, it's important that you have someone in your corner who is in for you and will help you to plan and stay on track implementing your goals. Are you ready? Let's rock and roll this boat. I will see you on the next episode of BFAB Made Simple. Just a reminder that this podcast is for educational purposes only. This podcast is not a substitute for health care by a doctor or other qualified medical professionals. This podcast is provided on the understanding that it does not constitute medical or other professional advice or services.